Today I'm going to be talking about the future of retail and how we are using customer centricity at American Apparel to intersect with IoT and ultimately omnichannel. So I've positioned my career from a place of value. There's no shortage of technology. There's no shortage of data at every organization I've ever been at. There's a shortage of business leaders to ultimately drive value in data and said technology. And ultimately today we're going to be discussing some of the practical applications. I wanted to kick it off with a quote from one of my favorite Irish playwrights. Nowadays, people know the price of everything and the value of nothing. And I think oftentimes businesses get caught up in what I call fake or false metrics, things like Facebook likes or Instagram followers or membership or maybe it's even downloads, and not really focusing on the true metrics that drive value, of which we'll be discussing here today. My 30-second background, so first we'll be discussing how we define value, how we measure it, and ultimately how we drive additional value. So my background, I've been a musician actually since I was about 6 years old. I was contemplating that career choice at one point. That's actually me on stage at the Viper Room in Hollywood. But ultimately I became a molecular biologist. I went to my undergrad at University of Kentucky, Lexington. I was on the fast track to get my PhD, and I decided I want to go into industry. And so upon graduation in 2000, I went to Amgen out of school, where I was doing small molecule drug development. I did, however, stay involved in music, and I had a recording school and academy in San Francisco, and it was through that experience I got my first Google Analytics account, and I integrated Google Analytics with Google AdWords and Salesforce, and really built my first consumer engagement platform. That was in the early 2000s, and so ultimately transitioned out of biotech into technology, and that landed me essentially from going from Silicon Valley in San Francisco to Silicon Beach in the Los Angeles area. Currently live in Venice. Snapchat is right down the street. So at American Apparel, I am Chief Digital Officer. When I first took the role, one of my buddies at Omnichannel was like, "Is that even a real title?" So just a very, very quick high-level overview of the teams that I manage. So I manage 5 different teams across 15 different markets, a total of about 40 people globally. So first off, we have acquisition. What are we doing to drive traffic? We have digital experience. What are we doing to convert it? And then we have ultimately retention. What are we doing to keep those consumers coming back in a cyclical pattern? That includes loyalty, call center, email, and so forth. The 2 foundational elements are ATG, e-commerce technology. So I manage a technology group. So I'm also doing a CTO level role, as well as data science. And I ensure that every single product that we develop and ultimately implement, it has some sort of tracking involved. And so we're really part of a major shift within the organization at American Apparel. We call it a digital transformation. There's no shortage of data, but it's really driving value and action from those data points. And that's what we will be getting into today. And so I usually kick off my talks with a data maturation curve. So we have ultimately business impact with complexity and ultimately value. And the first question is the organization collecting the right data? And it's not, are you collecting data? Are you collecting actually the right data? And then ultimately, are they reporting upon the right data? And are you driving insights from that, getting towards more sophisticated methodologies such as hypothesis testing and so forth, and then where it gets really fun on the predictive analysis front. Quick anecdote, before I came to American Apparel, I was at the Fox Network Group, and my internal clients there were Fox Broadcasting, FX Networks, and Fox Sports. And this was one network, and it was really interesting to see at the different business units where they were at on this curve. And so for Fox.com, I got them up and running doing testing within a period of months, as well as some of the other businesses were much further behind on the curve. And so I think it's really, really important to ultimately understand where the different business units lie. And here's a quick example of a user-level record that ultimately we collect in a single action, or a single session, over 300 variables in the case of a page level. And then on the video player, there was over 100 variables. So there was such a multitude of data, but ultimately it was paralyzing to the business. And so really simplifying it, driving it to very specific insights has really been the mainstay. So user states and building profiles for segmentation. So in my world, I think of 3 different types of users. We have the unknown user, the anonymous user, and the known user. I told that to my CEO, and she said, "Gosh, your world is really weird." But ultimately, there is value in each one of those user states. And so we have the unknown user. So as another example, when I was at Fox, we were looking to build the first data science optimization and CRM initiative. And the known user pool was very, very small. However, there were a ton of unknown users. And these could be people watching on broadcasts. These could be people watching on YouTube. In this instance, these were people that were actually had liked The Simpsons as one example. 74 million likes. But the conversion of those unknown users to known was very, very small. And so we set up a series of programs to drive them to become known, where there is the greatest amount of value. On the anonymous user front, so there's a tremendous amount of value you can start doing with the anonymous user, again, driving from unknown to anonymous. Once they come to your site or your mobile application, you can begin to start tailoring the content to that consumer. How many people here are using DMPs? Okay. Handful. So that's one of the best example where you're basically pulling in first, second, third-party data, and you're tailoring the content ultimately to that consumer, and again, driving value. And you can start to actually build a profile around this given consumer here. So you might know behavioral data, even though you don't know who they are, recency and frequency. You may know where they live, and ultimately using that data to start to build those profiles. So how do you drive the anonymous user to become known? Through a conversion event. It could be a registration. It could be social registration. It could be a purchase event. It could be downloading your app and then thereby registering. So you start to build the understanding of this profile. In this case, it's Kanye West, and I used to use Donald Trump, but people weren't finding that so funny. But in this case, you have Kanye, and so you know a lot about Kanye. You know his behavioral and what he's purchased, and you can start to really build these profiles and ultimately drive towards a valuation of this known user. And so once you have this understanding of these different users and profiles, and if you were to look at a value curve, ultimately the greatest amount of value is going to be on the right and then going to the left. But from a volume perspective, you're going to have your greatest amount of users that are actually probably on your left. And in that, the Simpsons example, it's tens of millions of, in some cases, hundreds of millions of users. Your anonymous users may be tens of millions, and your known users may be millions. And but what can you actually do with the data? Where does this become valuable? Is by driving it to ultimately take action by the different consumer touch points. And so what I've outlined at the bottom here are some of those touch points. So on the right, for Kanye, if we have, if he's purchased, then we can tailor an email, we can tailor an SMS, we can tailor an experience through an app. It could be a loyalty like reward through social. And then in the middle, we have the different ways you can tailor the experience through behavioral retargeting, doing things like DMP work with ads. It could be a site experience. And then on the far left, TV and video. So driving customer centricity through user evaluation. So I will use Mr. Pete Fader, who I'm calling the king of customer centricity. His definition here, so it's aligning the current and future needs of a select set of customers. And I think that is very, very important. It's not focusing on all of your customers, but ultimately on your customers that are absolutely driving value to the firm. And I've seen this firsthand at a number of organizations. The 80-20 rule really, really comes into effect. So the 4 different metrics, 3 are probably the most customer-centric. The first is realized customer value, remaining lifetime value, in CLV, ultimately the combination of the first 2, and net promoter score. When you purchase anything from Apple, the first question they ask you is, would you recommend this product to a friend? That, of course, is the net promoter score. And we've been doing some interesting modeling correlating the 2 between CLV and ultimately NPS. But to kick it off with a realized customer value case study. So I first learned of realized customer value when I was at a startup in Silicon Beach by a VC named Jeremy Liu. I know Pete knows Jeremy. Jeremy is amazing. Definitely one of the thought leaders in this space. One of his companies, I'm sure you've heard of, he was actually one of the seed investors is Snapchat. And so Jeremy really kind of was my foray into these metrics. And while I was at this company, it was actually renowned as the darling of Silicon Beach. This was a few years ago. The tech scene was just starting to emerge in Los Angeles. And this company had all of the flashy metrics I mentioned earlier. They had over 2 million Facebook followers. They had 10 million members. They had millions of customers. But as you got a little bit deeper under the hood, you began to see that ultimately the recency and frequency was quite low, or people that had purchased, it was actually a sliver of a percent of these numbers. And I took it a step further, and we actually looked at the realized consumer value. So we took our entire customer file, and we looked at acquisition cost and contribution margin, and what we found was that there was users that were negative thousands of dollars. and it was absolutely crippling the business. And this was because they were these users were serial exchange and returners. And so they would buy our product, and they would just cyclically, wear it once or twice and send it back. And there was literally thousands of them. And so we used that data immediately to drive change in the business around our return and exchange policy. Another example is this was a clustering analysis I did, also focused within value. This was at one of the major broadcasters. And so we used clustering, a statistical algorithm called excitation maximization, to really discern what were our highest value users, our mid and our low. And we're looking for different behavioral attributes to try to really understand what our high value users and the different tiers were doing on our website. And so some of the data here. So there was 4 major buckets that emerged. We had the highest value bucket, which we called the watchaholics. We had the casual viewers, and then the international, and then the passive users. And so these were some of the major metrics we looked at. There's 6 there. And ultimately what we saw was that you had your watchaholics were driving a tremendous amount of video ad views. And I was supporting the digital business. This was a $100+ million business. And so that was very, very interesting, was first to understand these watchaholics. And what we were able to do with this data was to create segments within Adobe Analytics and analyze their behavior. And we could see, okay, the watchaholics were doing X, Y, and Z. And so by taking that data and learning from it, we would then tailor our marketing communications and either drive additional emails to get them to come back, or a push notification, whatever it might be. And so we could have stopped there, but I actually took it a step further. And it was really this group at the bottom, the passive users, that were really interesting to me. And they weren't watching a lot of video ad views, video starts, so they were actually kind of lower on that scale. But they had a very kind of a noticeable visit count, which you see on the left. And so we created a segment in Adobe Analytics for these passive users by X segment definition. And what we saw is that they were coming back to the website very, very frequently. And the reason was because they were using the website as a TV guide. So ultimately, in looking at their pathing, they were coming to Fox.com. They were going from the homepage directly to the schedule. And so we were able to take that insight and actually test against it. And so on the homepage, we tested into putting not only the schedule, but an email collection notification, so they could actually enter their email and they get a notification on when their favorite show was on the air. And so what this did was it actually flipped the valuation curve a little bit on its head, because while I was supporting the $100+ million digital business, the reality is the billion-dollar business was within the passive users that were actually driving broadcast eyeballs. Audience development. So this is where the rubber really meets the road. So we spend a lot of time developing what are called custom audiences at American Apparel. And there's a number of attributes you can use. These are 4 of the most pronounced. You have email, phone, device, and cookie. And once you have these attributes, again, of these known users, and you can do it with different segments of your value known users, you can start to develop programs around them. And so you can create these custom audiences in Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Google actually just came out with a new product roughly 2 or 3 months ago called the custom audiences, where it's very similar. You can target YouTube as well as Gmail, as well as AdWords, again, with the same concept. But ultimately, you can drive value by targeting your advertising to meet the different values of your consumers with the different types of ads. So this is one example, not very complex. Behavioral retargeting, I'm sure most of you are currently doing that. But we've taken a bit of a step further, and we partnered with a company called Sprinklr. And within Sprinklr, we're pulling in a number of attributes. So we're pulling in page-level variables off of AmericanApparel.com. We use ExactTarget as our email service provider. So there's data that we had there around our loyalty program. And then Oracle ATG is our e-commerce backbone. And so we ultimately pulled all that data together into the Sprinklr social CRM, and it really allowed us to do some interesting things. So one is just to create lookalike modeling. And so once we have an understanding of our high-value consumers, we can then create additional segments and then do modeling against them to increase the number from 100,000 to maybe 1.5 million, and ultimately test against those. We were also able to look at in our email database, the patterns of behavior, users who are maybe dormant for a given period of time, and then outline activation campaigns to drive them back to the website to re-engage. But this third one is actually quite interesting. So by integrating and pixeling essentially our website, we were able to do cart abandonment in social. And so you guys are very familiar. If you're on a website, you add to cart, you might get an email, within a day or two with that specific product. Well, we've done the same thing, but we're actually doing retargeting in Facebook as an example. And so you add to cart, within literally a period of seconds, you'll get a different targeted dynamic ad essentially based on you as a consumer. And we've done a lot of testing around those different ads. I'll get to that in a moment. And this is exactly what that looks like. So you have ultimately someone who's added to cart, and they come back, and as you can see in the top, they can use the Facebook friends, use the code 15 to save 15%. And so how else are we using this data? We're using CLV within basically dynamic offers and incentives. And so the concept here, we've started initially working towards just doing batch testing. So we look at our high-value users, and we segment them, and then we target them with different offers. And working towards algorithmic testing, we're partnering with a company called Retention Science and doing some really interesting things there, using different models to ultimately test into what is the appropriate incentive to drive the consumer engagement, such that we're preserving margin, but also ultimately leveraging the highest lifetime valuable possible. CLV. So I have a Starbucks case study. How many coffee drinkers do we have here? Nearly everyone. How many of you use the Starbucks app? Quite a bit. Okay. So this was a study by a company called CustomerCentricity. So I'm curious, what do you guys guess would be the CLV of an average coffee drinker? With these assumptions, 21% margin, 75% retention rate, and a 20-year lifespan. Anyone have a number? Pretty close. I have a gift card for you. Okay. So you're the only one. So the Kissmetrics calculation came up with 14,000. The caveat here is that ultimately their formula is completely wrong. And actually, Pete uses the Kissmetrics example as what not to do for CLV. So I think it's a very important point to make here. And literally, their math is wrong. So side note, but you're fairly close, so you get the gift card. But the point I do want to make about Starbucks is that they were able to ultimately drive consumer value through an omnichannel experience. And in this instance, the Starbucks app, one of the most successful mobile payment systems in the US history, at 15% of total revenue, 6 million mobile transactions a week, and so forth. And how did they do it? They did it through their mobile application, right? So they were able to integrate their loyalty program with payment. I personally hate using cash. You look at Uber and Lyft and so forth. We're definitely working towards a cashless society. And so the ability to press a button and get your cup of coffee, it provides tremendous value to the consumer, and ultimately, that translates to the value of the business. So ultimately, you're trying to tailor the right message through the right channel to the right person at the right time, which is true omnichannel. And so with that, I'm going to dovetail a bit into some of the other areas that we're currently working on. So the concept of omnichannel. Omnichannel is a little bit of a misnomer. I think people hardly agree on how to actually spell it, let alone what it actually is. Is it 2 words? Is it hyphenated? I'm going with 1 word. But in my mind, omnichannel is the intersection of retail with digital. And what I mean specifically is someone's walking down the street and they trip a geofence, they get a push notification, that drives them into the store, and they then purchase. So if they then purchase, where does that order attribute to? And so this concept of order attribution has been top of mind for me. Does it go to retail, or does it go to the digital channel that drove them in? I think the answer is it's actually both. And so we're actually looking at omnichannel order attribution as kind of a core tenet of the business, especially as this is absolutely growing and absolutely the way of the future. So IoT, and combining this with omnichannel and ultimately our global RFID deployment. So very high level, American Apparel was actually one of the first organizations in the world to deploy a global RFID solution, over 200 stores, 50 million tags, and it was primarily focused on doing things like reducing shrink. So, that's interesting. However, again, myself as a technologist, I'm really trying to drive additional value within this technology. And there's a couple ideas. One, you can do actually shopping cart abandonment in store. So if someone tries on some jeans and they go to the dressing room and they don't purchase, you have to ask, okay, ultimately, why are they abandoning? Is it a problem with fit and so forth? And so that's one example. Another example is we're testing into essentially integrating our back-end RFID real-time inventory with mobile. And so we're right now going through a campaign with basically our RFID provider. And the concept is you could walk up to an American Apparel ad, and there's an NFC or a beacon, and you can actually tap your phone, and then ultimately a screen will come up, and you can get into a dialogue with ultimately a text bot. Similar to Facebook's announcement. But ultimately, you can learn more about the product. You have a product description. You have a, ultimately another photo. And then the questions. Do you need a size, style guide, or more information? If you want to check sizes, you can check sizes. And then you can actually say, what size do you need? I'll check a store to see where the inventory is actually available. In this case, we went with a large. And then on the right, you see the inventory that's available across the different colors. Well, at Melrose, we have black denim in 3. We have dark indigo and gray, where you can, again, omni-channel, just purchase right there and go and pick up. You can purchase right there, have it delivered to you. You can change location and ultimately engage in a number of fashions. So really excited about testing this. And here's another example. So they have the inventory in stock. You may tailor ultimately some sort of a discount to the consumer based on their CLV, and then you have the actual location of where the product is, and you're guiding them there, bringing it really full circle around the consumer experience end to end. And one other quick example. So I tested into a relationship with a company called Postmates. Does anyone use Postmates here? Okay. A good number. So Postmates is kind of like an Uber for delivery. And so they came to me roughly about 6 months ago with the concept of using their on-demand delivery service for, I came up with core basics. And so we tested into New York, we tested into San Francisco, and we saw really interesting adoption of consumers that were actually about double the average order value that we would see across some of our different markets. And so we ended up going live with a Postmates relationship. That was in March, so roughly about a month ago. And we saw really interesting consumer adoption. And you might ask yourself, okay, on-demand basics, who needs on-demand basics? But I guarantee you, and I've seen this empirically, when I've asked this question to a room full of millennials, they all raise their hands. And in the age of Amazon, people want things immediately. And so we ultimately launched, again, with the 2 markets. We expanded it to 31 markets. We went live on a Monday. By Tuesday, this was in TechCrunch and Mashable and so forth. But literally the next day, it went completely viral. And I mean, every major news publication picks this up, as a means of really driving innovation within retail and fashion. Business Insider said it has a strategy that could help save its business. So I thought that was pretty pronounced. There's also an interesting piece by Huffington Post where a woman in New York actually tested it and getting a bodysuit. She actually didn't get her bodysuit in 60 minutes. She got it in 41. Which is insane. But this is also cool because it opened up a door with Amazon. And Amazon came to me immediately after this went viral and is like, hey, Thoryn, why don't we test into same-day delivery? And you're like, oh, same day, that's so long. But ultimately, we know where the scale is going to be, and it's going to be within Amazon. So I'm currently testing into same day in Tokyo and San Francisco with Amazon, which I'm really excited about. And one other note that, again, this is all based on the, it's not actually a local fulfillment, it's based on retail fulfillment. So we're actually pulling the inventory in real time out of the retail stores. So again, kind of the culmination of that entire experience. So a few of the key takeaways, data maturation curve, I always harp on that. I think that's absolutely crucial for organizations. Driving the business towards customer-centric measurement and metrics. Segmentation, absolutely crucial. Learning what you can around your high-value users and then testing against your mid and your low-value consumers to drive them to be high. Testing the hypotheses there, really from a framing of using data to drive insights, insights to drive hypotheses, and hypotheses to drive your testing cycle. And then ultimately on-demand fulfillment. I can guarantee you will see this everywhere in the coming years and months. And one final note by my favorite scientist, Albert Einstein, strive not to be a success, but rather be of value. Thank you.